They say the best revenge is living well. But I'll let you in on a little secret. The real best revenge is sitting across the dinner table from your enemies and letting them think they've already won. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories have every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The thing about being rich is that nobody believes you when you look poor. I mean that literally. I drive a 2006 Toyota Tacoma with a crack in the passenger side mirror that I've been meaning to fix for 3 years. I wear a Casio watch. Not, ironically, not as some billionaire quirk. I just like it. It tells time. It doesn't need charging. What more do you want from a watch? My name is Frank Colton, and for the last 22 years I have owned Colton Marsh Industries, a manufacturing and logistics conglomerate that quietly sits in the top tier of its sector. We move products across 14 states. We employ just under 4,000 people. Last fiscal year, we cleared a number that would make your coffee go cold if I told you. But walk up to me on a Wednesday morning outside my house in Beckley, West Virginia, watering my tomatoes in a flannel shirt and beating up garden clogs. And you'd offer me a coupon, not a boardroom seat. That's exactly how I like it. Now, my daughter Lacey, God bless her, did not inherit my love of invisibility. She's sharp, she's beautiful, she's got her mother's laugh, and unfortunately, her mother's taste for dramatic men. When she brought Clayton Hail home for the first time 3 Thanksgivings ago, I shook his hand, looked him in the eye, and thought, this man has never been told no in his entire life. You can always tell there's a particular shine to people like that. Like the world has buffed them their whole lives. Clayton wasn't a bad person. I want to be clear about that. At least that's what I kept telling myself. He was smart, well-dressed, confident in a way that filled rooms. When I quietly put him through our internal vetting process, yes, I vetted my daughter's boyfriend. I'm not apologetic about it, his numbers were solid. His instincts were sharp. So, when Lacey told me she was serious about him, I did something I'd never done for any hire in 22 years. I promoted from emotion. I made Clayton Hail the CEO of Colton Marsh Industries. He had no idea who he was really working for. As far as Clayton knew, he had been headhunted by a prestigious firm, interviewed by a panel of executives, and earned the position on pure merit, which, to be fair, he mostly had. I just greased the door a little. Lacey knew, of course. She thought it was equal parts sweet and insane. Dad, she said the night I told her, sitting at my kitchen counter with a mug of chamomile tea. You do understand that this is the plot of a soap opera. I prefer to think of it as strategic family planning, I told her. She gave me the look. You fathers out there know the look. The one that says, I love you and you are completely unwell. For 14 months, everything was fine. Clayton ran the company well, better than I expected, honestly, which both pleased me and annoyed me in equal measure because it meant Lacey had better taste than I gave her credit for, and I wasn't ready to admit that yet. Then, one Thursday evening in March, Clayton called me, not as a son-in-law. He called me the way he always did. Warm, respectful, slightly performative in the way young executives are when they think they're talking to a simple older man. Frank, he said, I want you to come to dinner. Meet my parents properly. They're in town for the weekend. Honestly, they've been asking about you for a while. Something in my stomach shifted when he said that. Not an alarm exactly, more like the feeling you get when a word sounds familiar, but you can't quite place where you hear it. They've been asking about me? I said. Yeah, he said, and there was a half-beat pause that lasted just a little too long. You know how parents are. They want to know who their son is marrying. I almost said no. My gut was speaking pretty clearly, but there is a version of me. The version that spent 30 years building something from nothing. The version that's been tested and came out the other side. That doesn't run from gut feelings. He walks toward them slowly with his hands in his pockets. Sure, I said. Tell me where. The restaurant was called Aldridge's. The kind of place where the menu has no prices and the waitstaff introduces themselves by first name and makes eye contact like they've been trained to. I wore my cleanest flannel on purpose. Clayton met me at the door, freshly barbered, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than my first car. He looked at my shirt, and to his credit, to his genuine credit, he didn't flinch. "You look great," he said. "I look like a man who found parking," I replied. He laughed. I didn't. Inside, Stuart and Norma Hale were already seated. "Now, I need you to understand something about first impressions. In my experience, people who have done something wrong always overcorrect when they meet you. They're too warm, too welcoming. The smile arrives before the eyes do." Stuart Hale stood up and shook my hand with both of his, the double-handed shake, which in my experience means either you're deeply considering or you're deeply calculating, and said, "Frank, we have heard so much about you. Please sit." "Sit." Norma touched my arm and said I looked wonderfully comfortable, which is the expensive restaurant way of saying she'd clocked my flannel and filed it under not a threat. "Good." We ordered. We made small talk. Clayton talked about the company carefully the way he always did around me, keeping details vague out of what he thought was professional courtesy. Stuart asked about my little property in Beckley, which Lacey had apparently mentioned. I told him I grew tomatoes. He nodded the way people nod when they've stopped listening. And then about 40 minutes in, right between the entree and the moment I was starting to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, Stuart Hale reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. He pulled out an envelope, cream-colored, thick, the kind of envelope that doesn't come from a drugstore. He placed it on the table in front of me, gently, deliberately, the way you place something when you want the other person to understand that what's inside is significant. He folded his hands. Norma picked up her wine glass. Clayton, and this is the part I keep coming back to, Clayton looked down at his plate. "Frank," Stuart said, his voice dropping just enough to signal that we were no longer doing small talk, "we've been wanting to sit down with you for a long time. There are some things about the past, about your history, that we think deserve a conversation." I looked at the envelope. I looked at Stuart. I looked at Clayton, who was still studying his salmon like it owed him money. And I thought, there it is. 22 years of building, 22 years of silence, 22 years of believing that what happened with Victor Marsh stayed buried in the ground where I put it. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip. "Stuart," I said, setting it down with a quiet click, "before I open that, I think you should know something about me." He smiled. Patient, confident. The smile of a man holding what he believes are all the cards. "I'm listening," he said. I leaned forward. "I never sit down at a table I haven't already flipped." The envelope sat between us like a grenade with the pin already pulled, and nobody at that table, not Stuart, not Norma, not even Clayton, knew which one of us was already holding the pin. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you sincerely. I didn't open the envelope right away. That's important because the whole game, and make no mistake, this was absolutely a game depends on who blinked first. Stuart Hale had spent what I imagined was a considerable amount of time preparing for this moment. The restaurant, the timing, the cream-colored envelope was placed just so. This was choreography. And choreography only works when the other person follows the steps you laid out for them. I had no intention of dancing, so I picked up my fork, cut into my steak, chewed slowly, and let the silence sit on that table like a fifth guest nobody had invited. Norma shifted in her seat. Stuart's patient smile developed a small crack in the left corner. Clayton still hadn't looked up. Finally, after what I counted as a very satisfying 45 seconds, I set my fork down, wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin, and reached for the envelope. Inside were documents, photocopied but clean, organized with the kind of deliberate neatness that says a lawyer touched these. I didn't read them immediately. I didn't need to, because the moment my eyes landed on the name at the top of the first page, my entire chest went cold and completely calm at the exact same time. Victor Marsh. Let me tell you about Victor Marsh. In 1987, Victor Marsh and I were partners. We were 26 years old, broke in the specific way that only young men with enormous ambition and zero capital can be broke. And we have a plan to build something. A small manufacturing outfit in Columbus. Nothing glamorous. Metal parts for industrial equipment. The kind of business that doesn't make headlines but makes the world run. For 4 years, we built it together. And for 4 years, I ignored every sign that Victor was not the man I believed him to be. He was skimming, not dramatically, not all at once. The way terms work. Quietly, consistently until the structure is hollow and you don't know it until you lean on the wrong wall. By 1991, Victor had siphoned enough from our joint accounts to fund a separate operation, a competitor built entirely on the back of clients he'd poached, using our proprietary contacts and my relationships. When I found out, I wasn't angry in the loudest way. I went very, very quiet. I spent 6 months documenting everything. Every transaction, every diverted contract, every forged signature. And when I had enough, when the file was thick enough to end him 17 different ways, I sat across from Victor Marsh in that same small Columbus office, and I gave him a choice: walk away, dissolve his competing firm, sign over his remaining stake, and disappear. Or I take everything I have to the DA's office and he spends the next decade explaining himself to a jury. Victor Marsh chose to disappear. I rebuilt alone, and I swore I would never trust a partner again. What I didn't know, what I had no possible way of knowing, was that Victor Marsh had a younger brother 15 years his junior, a boy who was maybe 11 years old when all of this happened, a boy who grew up hearing one side of a story from a broken man who never once admitted what he'd actually done, a boy named Stuart. I looked up from the documents. Stuart was watching me with the focused intensity of a man who had waited a very long time for this exact moment. "Where did you get these?" I asked quietly. "Victor kept records," Stuart said, "his own records. Everything you did to him, Frank. Every threat. Every ultimatum. The way you forced him out of a company he helped build." I nodded slowly. "And you've been holding these for how long?" "Long enough," he said. "Victor passed away 4 years ago. Lung cancer. He died with nothing, Frank. Nothing. Because of what you took from him." And there it was. The grief underneath the strategy. I want to be honest with you. I felt it. A small, quiet ache for the version of this story that was true to Stuart because he sincerely believed it. "Stuart," I said carefully, "I'm sorry about your brother. I don't want your condolences. I know. What do you want?" He leaned forward. "I want you to resign quietly from whatever role you still play at Colton Marsh. I want a formal financial settlement. The number is in the envelope, paid to my family as restitution for what Victor lost. And I want it done before my son's name gets attached to whatever comes next." And that's when Clayton finally looked up. I want to describe what I saw on Clayton Hale's face in that moment because it matters enormously to everything that came after. It was not the face of a conspirator. It's just a dinner, and was now realizing it was never just a dinner. "Dad," Clayton started. "Clayton." Stuart's voice was a closed door. Clayton closed his mouth. I watched that exchange and filed it carefully. "How long have you known?" I asked Clayton directly. He opened his mouth, closed it again, looked at his father. "Clayton," I said, softer this time. "I'm asking you, not him." He exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. I knew there was history between our families. "Dad told me when Lacey and I got serious," he said. "He said there was a debt that needed settling and that I was being close to you was." He stopped himself. "Was what?" I said. "An opportunity. This is about making things right." I looked at her hand on mine. I looked at her face. I looked at the smile that had been ready and waiting since before I walked through the door. "Norma," I said pleasantly, "I need you to hear this next part very clearly, because here is the thing about a man who has been doing this for 30 years. You don't walk into a room like this empty-handed. Not when your gut spent the entire week before dinner whispering at you. Not when a name like Victor Marsh is still somewhere in your past. I had made some calls of my own. I placed my own envelope on the table, smaller, white, unremarkable looking. Victor's records are incomplete, I said, which makes sense, because a man who is building a false narrative tends to only keep the pages that support his version. Stewart's eyes dropped to my envelope. What I have here, I continued, are the original bank records from our joint account. Between 1,989 and 1,991, the withdrawal patterns, the wire transfers to a shell company registered in Victor's wife's maiden name. The correspondence, including 3 emails in which Victor explicitly discussed his plan to replicate our client list and launch a competing firm using our infrastructure. I also have a signed affidavit from a man named Dale Pruitt, Victor's accountant at the time, who is 71 years old, perfectly healthy, and absolutely willing to confess to what he processed on Victor's instructions. Stewart's face had changed. The patient confidence was gone. In its place was something raw. Something that looked beneath the anger almost like grief. "You destroyed him," he said. His voice had lost its dinner party finish. "He destroyed himself," I said. "And then he told you a story that let him die feeling like a victim instead of what he actually was. You threatened him. You forced him. I gave him a choice," I said. "The same choice the law would have given him, except with considerably less public humiliation. What he did with that choice was entirely his own." Stewart stood up, not dramatically, just the slow rise of a man whose legs had made a decision before his brain caught up. Norma touched his arm. "Sit down, Stewart," I said quietly. "Please. Because this conversation isn't finished. And the part that's left, the part that actually matters, is about your son." And for the first time since I sat down, I saw something in his face that wasn't panic or performance, or the rehearsed confidence of a man raised to expect the world to arrange around himself. "I saw something that looked remarkably like Clayton," I said. "I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen to me the way you would listen if I were just Frank. Not your father-in-law, not some old man in a flannel shirt, just Frank." He nodded barely, but he nodded. I leaned forward. "I know who you are. I've known since before you walked through my daughter's front door. And what I'm about to tell you is going to change every single thing you think you understand about your life for the last 14 months. The waiter appeared at the edge of the table. "Can I interest anyone in dessert?" he asked brightly. All 4 of us stared at him. He backed away slowly. Clayton Hail was about to find out that the quiet old man in the flannel shirt wasn't a guest in his world. He was the architect of it. And the blueprints were about to land on the table. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but that's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. I want to tell you something about the word reveal. People think a reveal is dramatic. They think it comes with raised voices and pointed fingers, and someone storming out of a room. They've watched too many movies. In my experience, the most devastating revelations happen in the quietest voices, the ones that don't need volume because the words themselves are heavy enough to pin a man to his chair without laying a single finger on him. I poured myself a glass of water, took a sip, set it down, and I began. "Clayton," I said, "what do you know about how you got your job?" He straightened slightly. The CEO reflex, the automatic assembly of composition that I'd watched him deploy in boardrooms for over a year. "I was headhunted," he said. "Executive search firm. I interviewed with the board. It was a competitive process." "It was," I agreed, "completely valid. Your numbers were strong. Your instincts were good. I want you to hold on to that part because it's true, and it matters." "What do you mean? You want me to hold on to that part?" "I mean," I said slowly, "that the search firm that headhunted you was contracted by me. The board you interviewed with reports to me. The position you have held for the last 14 months. The one with the corner office on the 19th floor, and the car allowance, and the salary that I know because I approved it, exists inside a company that I own entirely. Have owned for 22 years. The frown deepened, then stopped. Then his face did something I can only describe as a slow system shutdown, like a computer that has been handed information that does not compute and simply stops processing. He started. Frank Colton, I said, founder and sole owner of Colton Marsh Industries. The Marsh in the name was Victor's. I kept it because I built this company on the lessons he taught me, and I never wanted to forget it. You have been running my company, Clayton, reporting to my executives, signing off on my contracts, sitting in a chair that I placed you in. Absolute silence. Stewart had sat back down at some point during this. I hadn't noticed when. He looked like a man watching a building he'd spent years constructing, quietly folding in on itself floor by floor. Why? Clayton said. It came out younger than he intended, stripped of the boardroom finish. Just a man asking a genuine question. Why would you do that? Norma made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a scoff. So this was all some kind of test? No, I said, turning to her with a patience I want you to understand was completely genuine. This was me being a father. There's a difference. I gave Clayton a moment because what I just handed him was a lot of weight, and I'm not a cruel man. I wanted him to find his footing before the next part because the next part was the part that was going to require him to make a decision. And decisions made in free fall are rarely the ones people stand behind later. He ran both hands through his hair, exhaled through his nose, looked at the tablecloth for a long moment. Then he looked at his father, and I watched something shift in Clayton Hale's eyes that I had not anticipated. It wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't a shame exactly. It was something colder and more clarifying. How long? He said to Stewart. Quiet. Direct. Stewart said nothing. Dad. Clayton's voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. How long have you known who Frank was? How long? Stewart straightened his cufflinks, a delay tactic so transparent it was almost sad. I began to suspect when you told me the company name, Colton Marsh. Victor mentioned Colton to me years ago. I did some research. When I told you the company name, Clayton repeated slowly, meaning before Lacey and I got engaged. I was protecting our family. You positioned me, Clayton said. The words came out flat and precise like he was reading from a document. You found out who I was working for and you saw an opportunity. You let me fall in love with Lacey. You encouraged it because you thought I was your way in. Norma reached for her son's hand. Sweetheart, your Uncle Victor deserves. Don't. Clayton pulled his hand back. Don't bring up Victor right now. I stayed very still because what was happening across that table had nothing to do with me anymore, and everything to do with a young man seeing his father clearly. Maybe for the first time, and the right thing to do at that moment was absolutely nothing. Stewart tried a different angle. The father angle. The one that comes out when logic fails. Everything I did was for this family. Clayton, that man took everything from your uncle, from our family. You were finally in a position to what? Clayton's voice cracked on the word and then hardened immediately after. The way young men's voices do when they refuse to let emotions finish a sentence. Help you extort my father-in-law? Use my wife's family to settle a 30-year grudge over a story that, based on what Frank just put on this table, wasn't even true? Stewart had no answer for that. I picked up my water glass again, mostly to give my hands something to do. After a long moment, Clayton turned back to me. His face was composed now, deliberate. I recognized it. It was the face he wore walking into difficult board meetings. It was. I realized with a quiet pride I kept entirely to myself, the face of a CEO. I owe you an apology, he said. You don't, I said. You didn't know. I knew enough to feel something was wrong about tonight, and I came anyway, he said. I sat at this table while my father put that envelope in front of you, and I looked at my plate. That's not who I want to be. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said, it isn't. And the fact that you know that is exactly why you still have a job Monday morning. Something moved across his face. Relief, trying to be identified about it. As for you, I said, turning to Stuart. He lifted his chin, the last posture of a man who has lost and hasn't finished pretending otherwise. Those documents you brought tonight, I said, nodding at the cream envelope still sitting on the table, are incomplete, misleading, and in the context of what I've presented alongside them, entirely harmless to me. I want you to know that. I want you to understand that you came here tonight with what you believed was a weapon, and it turned out to be a photograph of a weapon. Stuart said nothing. His jaw was working, but no sound was coming out. I'm not going to pursue anything legal against you, I continued. Not because I couldn't, but because Victor was your brother, and grief makes people do things that the undamaged version of themselves never would. I understand that. I'm sincerely sorry for how he told you that story. And I'm sorry you spent years carrying it. Norma's eyes were wet. She was looking at the tablecloth. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But I need you to hear this next part, I said clearly, because I'll only say it once. I leaned forward. Clayton is the CEO of my company. Lacey is my daughter, and as of her 25th birthday 3 months ago, a majority shareholder in that same company. Your son married into something you spent years trying to take a piece of, and the only reason any of that remains available to him and by extension to your family is because he just proved to me in the last 10 minutes that he wasn't you. The silence that followed that sentence was the most expensive silence I have ever purchased, and I didn't spend a single dollar on it. Stuart Hail picked up his napkin, folded it, placed it on the table beside his plate, the gesture of a man who has nothing left to do with his hands. We should go, he said to Norma. Quietly, she nodded. Didn't look at me, didn't look at Clayton. They stood. Stuart reached into his jacket reflexively, I think, toward the envelope, then stopped. Left it there. Smart. He paused at Clayton's shoulder on the way out. Son, I'll call you, Clayton said. Later. Not tonight. Later. The distance in those 2 words could have filled the restaurant. Stuart and Norma Hail walked out of Aldridge's, and I watched them go, and felt nothing dramatic. Just the quiet, settled feeling of a thing that had been unfinished for 30 years, finally being placed neatly on a shelf. Clayton and I sat in silence for a moment. The waiter appeared again. Bless him. With the confidence of a man who had decided the storm had passed. Desserts? He asked. Clayton looked at me. I looked at Clayton. You know what? I said, yes. What's the chocolate thing? 2 of those, I said, and coffee. Real coffee, not the decaf nonsense. The waiter disappeared. Clayton let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting since before the appetizers. Frank, he said. Yeah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me always. He looked me directly in the eye. Do you actually trust me to run the company? Not as Lacey's husband? As a CEO? I considered the question the way it deserved to be considered. 6 months ago, I said, you restructured the Midwest distribution chain and saved us $4.3 million annually. You did it without being asked. You identified the problem, built the solution, and presented it to the board before I even knew there was an issue. I paused. So, yes, I trust you. He nodded slowly, processing. But, I added. He looked up. Monday morning, you and I are having a proper conversation. Not father-in-law and son-in-law, not owner and CEO, 2 men. Honest conversation about what we both know and how we move forward. No more gaps. No more flannel shirt mystery. The corner of his mouth moved. You're really not going to stop wearing the flannel, are you? The flannel is non-negotiable, I said firmly. He laughed. A real one. The first real thing I'd heard from him all evening. The lava cakes arrived. We ate them. The chocolate was obscenely good. I made a note to tip the waiter generously on the way out because honestly, the man had earned it. I drove home in my 2006 Toyota Tacoma with the cracked passenger mirror. The city moved past the windows and I let it. I thought about Victor Marsh, the young man he was before greed got its hooks in him. I thought about Stuart sitting somewhere tonight with a story he'd have to rebuild from the foundation up. I thought about Clayton driving home to my daughter, trying to figure out how to explain an evening that had rearranged his entire understanding of his own life. I thought about what it means to build something, not just a company, a way of moving through the world. That means when someone finally comes for you, and someone always eventually comes for you, you are not caught off guard at a dinner table. You are already home. I pulled into my driveway, sat in the truck for a minute, looked at my house. Modest, warm, lit from inside, because Lacey had stopped by earlier and never remembers to turn off the kitchen light. My phone buzzed. A text from Clayton. I told Lacey everything. She says you're impossible and she loves you. Also, she says the flannel thing is embarrassing and she agrees with me. I smiled at my phone in the dark, typed back, tell her the flannel built her inheritance. I put the phone in my pocket, got out of the truck, walked up to my front door. Somewhere across the city, Stuart Hale was sitting with an empty envelope and a story with holes in it, and I was going home to my tomatoes. Some men built empires to prove something. Frank Colton built himself to protect something. There's a difference. And tonight, finally, everyone at the table understood it. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere. Would you like me to help you draft a follow-up scene where Frank and Clayton have their Monday morning meeting?